Great to have you here. Looking forward to getting into our next whiteboard topic, which is going to be the 9 foods highest in mold and mycotoxins. Now, if you aren't familiar with mold and mycotoxins, I just want you to know that it's said that over 52% of homes in the United States and over in Europe, especially the UK, do have some level of mold infestation. It happens in damp-based environments, water damage in your homes, but also it can come from food. So I want to share with you the little-known foods that are also higher in mold and mycotoxins. Now, mycotoxins are simply byproducts of mold that affect your immune system. And if it affects your immune system, it can lead to autoimmune issues, brain issues, skin rashes, allergies, asthma, and so much more. So that's why I want to share with you this topic here today, because it's not talked about enough. And I really believe that a lot of people should be looking at mold as one of the underlying root causes of their health issues. So let's get into this right now. The 9 foods, and the first one is alcohol. Why alcohol? Well, think about it. Anything that has been aged, which alcohol has, you're going to see a lot of foods on this list that have been more aged foods, fermented foods. They're going to have the opportunity to grow more mold. Mold grows in damp, dark places. Alcohol is stored in damp, dark barrels and others such as that. Plus, they can come from grapes or grains that already had pre-existing mold on them, which leads to then more mold in the alcohol. So if you drink alcohol and you get itchy eyes, watery eyes, flushed skin, you get hives, it could be a sign of multiple things. Food sensitivity, yes, of course, but it could be higher levels of histamine, potentially from a mold-based issue. All right, the second one is cheese. Yes, typically you see these green and blue spots on cheese, but remember, it's not just when you can see it. Most aged cheeses have some level of mold from that aging process, okay? Sometimes if you go to a cheese-based shop, they actually cut out the outside mold, but you know that that mold has been growing there. And if you're sensitive to it, remember, those spores, when they start off, are invisible. That means lower levels of mold, but you're still being exposed. So unless it's fresh cheese, most likely there's some level of mold. Next up is processed meats. Well, processed meats, besides being one of the top 10 carcinogens for causing cancer, that's one big reason to stay away. They're also aged and they can start to rot a bit and have some mold on them as well. Now, again, I'm not saying meat in general. I'm saying processed meats, your bologna, your deli meats, the salami, the sausage, those types of things can be a little bit more prone to mold. Number 4 is coffee. And as I show right here, you have this. I actually used to use a microscope in my private practice. I did that for about 10 years and actually looked at people's blood under the microscope. And it's amazing what you can see inside of our blood when you magnify that 10,000x. So what we're looking at is we can actually start to see some of these mold spores, fungus-based spores start to grow inside of the body as well. Again, this is very well known. I'm going to show you a lab test at the end that actually shows you your mold levels or mycotoxin levels if you're ever interested. But you probably heard that coffee is one of those substances that can start to get moldy. Now, why would it start to get moldy? Well, it's stored like a lot of grains are or beans are inside of large silos or vats. And if a little bit of moisture gets in there, what can happen is you start to get mold to grow on the beans or on nuts, which we'll talk about in a moment, or on grains. So really important to make sure that you're going for a mold-tested coffee. I have all my favorite brands of all products in general at stevencabral.com/resources, and I'll link that up in the show notes below as well. All right, and again, just when stating coffee and items like this, it doesn't mean that you can't consume them. It just means that you want to make sure that you're symptom-free and also that you're going for a brand that does test for mold. Dried fruit is a big one. Again, it's aged. It's allowed to sit out and get a little bit of dampness. It can start to grow mold. Dried fruit in general, though, much easier to consume a lot of it. It's going to be a little bit higher glycemic. It's still going to have the fiber, still going to have a lot of the nutrients, but I would much rather have you consume good, whole, raw-based fruit before it's been essentially dried. All right, along the same lines is processed fruit juice. Now, one of the little-known things is that a lot of the not fit for consumption or shown in a store fruit goes to be made into juice. And the reason it does is that it might have a little bit of rotting, it might have some brown spots, it might be banged up a little bit, and people aren't going to purchase it. So they turn it into juice instead. Or it's end of season, and they don't want to waste all this fruit, so what do? Well, they turn it into juice. I'm not saying every company does this, but a lot do. And because of that, well, you can end up with some of that mold inside of your fruit juice. Fruit juice is also stripped away of a lot of the fiber. It's heated up. It's not a health-based food. Again, I would rather have you eat that organic fruit rather than consume it as a beverage. This is technically number 7. I wrote it as number 8. We'll list them below, but see this right here? I don't know if you can see that, but these little white fuzzies that you might find in one of the bags of nuts or beans or coffee, whatever it might be, or grains, that is actually the beginning of mold. That is the mold starting to spore and grow. Really important that you look for that. If you ever see that, throw the whole bag out, because the whole bag is ruined because it's airborne as well, and it can move around all the other nuts, beans, grains, seeds, etc. So again, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't eat nuts, walnuts, almonds, macadamia nuts, pecans. There's lots of great nuts for you to consume. Just make sure that they are mold-free. All right, number 8 is condiments. So what does this look like? Well, it looks like tomato sauce as a ketchup, but what does that mean? Well, it means, again, that they took maybe end of the season tomatoes, maybe some rotten tomatoes, maybe some moldy tomatoes, and it went into that condiment. But also, the truth is this, is you keep that condiments in your fridge for sometimes what? A month, 2 months, 3 months. No big deal when you open it, not even really the first week, but by week 3, week 4, well, you're starting to potentially grow some mold inside of that. So try to use up all those condiments within a few weeks of opening the bottle, not a few months. Big tip right there. All right, and the last one, number 9 is this, it's spices. So what are spices? Well, spices are things like your, let's just say, oregano that you might have in there, your thyme, all the different things that you might add to your specific dishes. Now, typically, these would be antifungal. These would actually be anti-mold. That's a great thing. We want that, right? But what happens is this, the spice itself is actually antifungal. You're not going to grow mold on oregano. It's not going to happen. You're not going to grow mold on powder arco or rosemary. But what happens is this. Let's say you store those spices, again, in a humid, damp-based place. That mold can start to grow inside of the container. So I want you to be really careful how you store the spices. Just make sure it's airtight in a glass container, or if it's bagged in a specific bag that's completely airtight, not exposed to humidity, not exposed to moisture, because the inside of those bags and inside the refrigerator, that's where you be careful what you store in your refrigerator. It's wet, it's damp, it's dark. So remember, damp, darkness, and aging is what allows things to grow mold, and some things, as you've seen, grow mold easier than others. So hopefully this was helpful. Like I said, I did want to show you what an actual mold lab looks like. So these can be done right at home with just a urine sample, and you can actually see if you have higher levels of mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are essentially the poisons that enter your body from the mold. So mold comes into your body through your nose, through your mouth, potentially even through your eyes. And what happens is, as it starts to move into the bloodstream, it produces certain mycotoxins. These mycotoxins, as you can see, this person has high levels of mycotoxins here, moderate levels right here. They begin to what? They begin to shut down the immune system. They begin to cause more allergies, more asthma, more skin rashes, more brain fog. So if you've ever been wondering if you have high mold, you can certainly run a mold-based lab. You can go to equi.life, that's equi.life/labs. It's open source at-home lab testing. You can run a mold protocol. I'll link that up in the link below. So if you don't want a lab test, you can simply run a mold protocol. And you can always get more free information at stephencabral.com/1937. I did a full podcast episode on this, my podcast being the Cabral Concept. Hopefully this was helpful. This is meant to be an intro video. If you have questions, let me know. I'm always happy to help. Take care.